Hi Mindsetters, and welcome to another section of Grade 11 CAPS content in Geography. Today, we'll be dealing with resources as well as sustainability. In order for you to understand this concept, it is important for you to understand the definition of each one, as well as link these two concepts. Let's take a closer look at the content you will need to analyze before understanding all sections. The content is as follows. In this lesson, you will be required to review the following: the relationship between resources as well as economic development. Remember, with relationships, you need to have a deeper understanding of the impact of one on the other. In this case, we'll specifically look at resources as well as economic development. Moving on, we further look at exploitation as well as depletion of resources. In this case, we look at more economically developed countries taking advantage and depleting the resources of less economic developed countries. And moving further on, concepts of sustainability as well as the sustainable use of resources. These are some of the concepts that we will need to understand in order to create a better understanding of resources and sustainability. So what are resources? Resources could be the air we breathe, the trees we plant, to the depths below the Earth's surface of those mineral resources that exist. What already you should be thinking about is the countries that have more resources as well as the countries that have less resources. And how does this affect their economic development? Let's look at some definitions in order to help us better understand the concepts we are dealing with. Resources. Simply put, things people use, a key concept, to help them with their needs. Every human being on this planet has needs, and these needs are helped to be achieved by obtaining resources. Some of us require more resources, whilst others require less resources. Let's look at the term economic development. Development that involves the efficient use of resources to improve the standard of living as well as the quality of life of an individual as well as a nation. These two concepts help us better understand the unequal distribution of wealth across the planet, and therefore this section deals largely with your ability to make informed judgments about how resources are used as well as abused around the world. In order for us to better look at this concept, let's look at an activity that helps us better understand how these things come together. We will look specifically at South Africa and the resources, in this case, mineral resources that are distributed across South Africa. In this question, we refer to the map of South Africa showing the uneven distribution of natural resources. Upon studying this map, you would be able to observe the following: resources in the form of asbestos, gold, iron, manganese, chrome, as well as coal. And if we look at this map, immediately you can see that there is an unequal distribution of resources to the east as well as to the west of the country. This is largely due to the climatic conditions experienced in southern Africa. Note the concentration of mineral resources in the east of the country, especially in provinces like Mpumalanga, the northern parts of KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the northwest and Gauteng. What factors influence this distribution? In order for us to understand the factors, we must understand why. And the primary reason for this distribution is the climatic location of southern Africa. And note the following: your influencing South Indian High brings in that rainfall which loosens the soil, as we've discussed in previous lessons. And therefore, the resources that we are looking at are the mineral resources that exist in South Africa. Hence, there is a concentration of population in the east of the country. And due to the resources, this increases the population and influences the migration towards these provinces, hence for employment opportunities. Let's look at the types of questions that you can receive for this type of activity. The question, A. List 3 important mineral resources in Mpumalanga. Note, Mpumalanga has a wealth of distribution of resources. And in this case, we're looking at the following. Let's erase some of this so we could see it much more clearly. Immediately, you should be able to determine the following. That in Mpumalanga, there's a large concentration of coal. So our first answer, coal. The second largest concentration of minerals in Mpumalanga, note the following, and that would be gold. And amongst other resources in Mpumalanga, we also see that there are aspects of manganese and chrome. You can choose any one of the two. And that would afford you the full 6 marks. Let's look at the next question. Suggest at least one way in which each of these 3 resources identified in question 1.1 is used. We've identified coal, gold, as well as chrome. What are the uses of these minerals? Remember, coal, especially for coal burning, generates electricity. 90% of our electricity needs in South Africa are satisfied by coal burning. Gold, jewelry. Most of the important aspects of the value of gold is determined by its finished product, which is jewelry. And hence we have a lot of jewelry manufacturers in this country. Chrome. Chrome is what we term an alloy metal. When mixed with other metals, it strengthens. Here's some information for you. When you refer to an alloy, it is a combination of different types of metal, like iron ore, chrome, and platinum. Chrome is an additive to other types of metals, and we find an abundance of this particular type of mineral in and around Mpumalanga as well as the Limpopo province. So for chrome, we can add alloy metals. Remember, it's an additive to improve the stability and density of different types of materials. The next question, suggest why manufactured products are more valuable than raw materials. Simply put, in our country, we are forced to mine most of these minerals. However, they lose their value when we import them to other countries. The important aspect here is that South Africa, day by day, is trying to ensure that they convert the raw material, for example, gold, to jewelry rather than just importing these products overseas. In order to strengthen our economy, it is important to ensure that the products that we ship overseas, that we sell to other countries, is in its finished form and not in its raw form. So suggests why manufactured products are more valuable than raw materials. Let's look at that one. The value of the finished product is higher than the raw material. That's our first option, which would afford us the 2 marks. Remember, if there is a conversion of the raw material, that would be providing employment opportunities in the country. So we can include that. The employment opportunities increase due to the conversion of the raw material. And remember, as soon as we are converting these raw materials into a finished product, or we are also increasing our labor force, our economy is growing, and hence the economic development of the country will improve. Let's go back and recap on our answers. I will repeat the question. Suggest why manufactured products are more valuable than raw materials. And in terms of value, we are looking at South Africa as a country. We are looking at aspects of minerals like gold, chrome, asbestos. And why is it important for our country to not only retrieve these raw materials, but also convert them to a finished product? Number one, remember, the value of the finished product is much higher than the raw material. Secondly, the employment opportunities increase due to the conversion of raw materials. Remember, in order to convert the raw material, we need to build factories, we need to employ people, and this would improve people's livelihoods. The third answer is the economic development of the country will improve. As more and more people are working, more and more income is generated, and people are able to afford those luxuries in life. Let's move on to the next aspect of discussion. We will now deal with the exploitation as well as depletion of resources. So, what have we done? We have looked at resources, and in particular, we have looked at the specific type of resources that involves extraction of raw materials. Example, the minerals within the Earth's surface. In South Africa, we've looked at the definition of a resource as well as its impact on economic development. Now we will look at the exploitation as well as depletion of these resources. Let's look at some definitions in order for you to better understand. Depletion. It is the reduction in the supply through the use of resources in large quantities. Greed forms an important part of depletion. Once we've able to obtain and identify an area that is resourced, unfortunately, the greed factor comes in, and this means there will be a larger depletion of these resources. And remember, when you've studied your resources in grade 10, you've learnt about renewable as well as non-renewable resources. Most of the resources that have value are often termed non-renewable resources. And again, these would be the minerals that we've just discussed. Let's look at the term exploitation. Exploitation is the careless use of resources. Note, this word is a key word in order for you to understand exploitation. The careless use of resources that does not consider the consequences of each action. When we're looking at depletion as well as exploitation, these two terms feed off each other. You must understand, with depletion comes exploitation, and greed forces people to enhance the attraction of the non-renewable resources, as well as, in this case, we're going to look at renewable resources. Remember, resources that can be replaced or regenerated. The first type of resources that we will look at is a renewable resource. A renewable resource is that type of resource that is easily obtained and can be replenished or replaced. A non-renewable resource, a resource that cannot be renewed or replaced. And as we've been discussing, minerals as well as soil, which we will discuss later, are aspects of non-renewable resources, which once used cannot be recovered. Renewable resources can be recovered. Let's look at a typical type of question that you will receive for this particular section. Differentiate, which means what is the difference between renewable and non-renewable resources. A typical type of exam question that allows you to define and allow you to explain your understanding of these two concepts. And remember, you've done this already, so you should be able to identify the key words that help you better understand. Renewable. A key aspect of renewable, and let's go further, can be replenished, or in simpler terms, replaced. Let's look at the next term, non-renewable. And simply put, cannot be replenished. And remember, another word for replenished is replaced. These are the two ways in which we can define renewable as well as non-renewable resources. Renewable resources can be, non-renewable cannot be. Next question, why is the management of non-renewable resources so important? And with this aspect, we're going to bring something that you've been learning from your previous lesson in development geography. And I'm going to take this further by explaining these concepts as follows. You have concentrated on MEDCs as well as LEDCs. MEDCs are more economically developed countries. LEDCs are less economic developed countries. More, less. What's the difference between the two? The difference is that with less economic developed countries, they have not been able to convert their raw materials into finished products, and therefore are forced to sell their raw materials in its raw state. However, more economic developed countries have been able to convert, and therefore their economies are much better. So across the world, we have two types of countries. A more economic developed countries, and these are countries in the northern hemisphere, and less economically developed countries, those countries that are in the southern hemisphere. However, the concentration of resources is in the southern hemisphere, and this leads to exploitation as well as depletion of these resources. If we concentrate on this type of question, which is why is the management of non-renewable resources so important? In order for a country to develop economically, it needs to manage its resources. Its resources form part and parcel of its economic development, as well as the nature in which the conditions are created for people to live. So, a country like South Africa, which is well resourced in terms of its mineral resources, as well as other types of resources, which includes trees, as well as the quality of life people are living, needs to be protected. And in order for these resources to be protected, we need good management principles. We need to ensure that these resources, especially our wealth of minerals, especially our agricultural activities, are protected for future generations. And if it's not protected, we will sit in a situation where these resources are being depleted and exploited. And what's going to happen to our future generations? They would be at a loss, and therefore our economic development will increase. Management principles are simply putting in place the sustained use of these resources. We must ensure that for future generations of our country, your kids, your grandkids, you have to ensure that our resources are taken care of. And the concept of sustainability here comes in. Sustainability is our ability to ensure that we are protecting these resources for future generations. Minerals, agriculture, mining activities, these must be properly managed on a year-to-year basis to ensure that although we extract these raw materials, we do not extract all these raw materials for our greed and consumption. We must develop our economy sustainably. So why is the management of non-renewable resources so important? Let's look at some possible answers here. To protect the economic development of our country. Further, to ensure sustained use of these resources, and also to ensure growth and employment. These are some of the aspects that should be considered when management principles are put in place. And in our country, a government is charged with the responsibility to ensure that our resources are protected, our labor is protected, and all aspects of economic development center around a country's resources. And how these resources are managed determines the economic development for future generations. Let's look at the next question. And I love paragraph type questions. Write a paragraph, approximately 10 lines, to explain why you think the unequal distribution, very important, the unequal distribution of resources in the world affects resource exploitation. Now let's think about this carefully. If we've previously said that the Northern Hemisphere has your more economic developed countries, and your Southern Hemisphere has your less economic developed countries. However, all the resources of the world are largely located in the Southern Hemisphere. What is the problem here? If I think about it, so it's the countries in the north that want to exploit the countries in the south in order to obtain these raw materials as resources, take it to their countries, convert it into a finished product, and grow their economies. Let's go back to the question. Why do you think, very important, the unequal distribution of resources in the world affects resource exploitation? It stands to reason that those countries without the raw materials, without the mining resources, without the proper agricultural systems, will be dependent on countries that they can exploit, pay cheaper prices, and obtain these raw materials. Remember, as we've discussed previously, the converted product is of much greater value than the raw material. So it is the aim of more developed countries to extract these raw materials in its raw form, to buy gold from South Africa rather than jewelry, because jewelry would have a much higher price than gold. Yes, and therefore chrome, rather than buying it in its alloy form, which is a combined distribution of different materials, I would rather buy the chrome and then convert it in my own country, provide employment and job opportunities in my own country. So can you see the distribution, the unequal distribution? What is happening presently is that we are trying to put systems in place in order to ensure that our raw materials stay within our country. We're also trying to ensure that we grow and develop our population in order for them to be gainfully employed in factories, so that we are developing our economic development much better. The unequal distribution means that those more economic developed countries will be dependent on our raw materials. We have to ensure that we convert these products so that the price and value increases, and therefore our economies uplift. Let's look at the next section. Concepts of sustainability as well as the sustainable use of resources. In this section, we will now look at efforts being made in order to ensure that there is a sustainable use of resources. Remember, we've discussed sustainability is largely to protect our resources for future generations. We must ensure that we do not deplete as well as exploit our present resources, and we protect them so that our economy is constantly developing. Let's look closely at the definitions of these terms. Sustainability. Meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. I love these words, compromising and ability. The more we exploit now, the less we will have in future. Very important. We must ensure that we sustainably use our resources in this generation so that our economy grows and future generations are protected. But we've got to ensure that we protect our interests for future so that our country, we as South Africans and Africans, grow and develop and make sure that our economies become stronger and stronger so that countries in the Southern Hemisphere become more economically developed. Simply put, what is sustainability? I've chosen to draw a specific diagram to help you explain and understand better what sustainability is all about. When we're looking at sustainability, there are three aspects that you need to understand. The one is society. And simply put, this means people. The next is the environment. The environment is where the resources are located. The next is the economy, and that is the country as well as government. Sustainability needs to ensure that all three of these aspects are equal. That means we must ensure that our economy is growing steadily whilst satisfying people and whilst not exploiting the environment. When does it become unsustainable? When one of these three aspects grow. You will note in this particular pie chart, there is an equal distribution. Simply put, it's an equal obligation to each of these, the people, the resources, as well as the economic growth. However, those countries that are unsustainable have either the concentration put on growing their economy. When the economy is growing, the environment and the people will suffer. If we take care of the people, then the economic development suffers. And if we take care too much of the environment, both the economy as well as society is not developing. So sustainable use of resources, sustainability, requires us to ensure that there is a balance between society, environment, as well as the economy. If we do not ensure the balance, one of the three will be higher whilst the other two will suffer. I suggest you draw this diagram so that you are able to ensure that when you're studying the section on sustainability, you remember these three concepts of society, environment, as well as economy. And note that when one is increasing, the other two are decreasing. And this would mean that it becomes unsustainable use of the economy, unsustainable use of people, unsustainable use of the environment. Let's move on to the next section. A typical type of question for this section. Many people feel that the earth is running out of resources too quickly and that our time to continue living on the planet is running out. And if you've been watching a lot of movies, you will see that most of our movies today are predicting the doomsday when our resources are totally depleted after high levels of exploitation. Suggest in a paragraph ways in which we in South Africa can achieve sustainable living and still ensure a stronger social, environmental, and economic growth. Remember these three concepts: social, environmental, as well as economic. How do we ensure that we always keep a balance between the three? And for this type of question, I want you to remember the following. I call it the 3 R's. The first R is reuse. The second R is recycle. And the third R is reduce. So how do we use these three concepts of reuse, recycle, as well as reduce to improve our economy? Let's go back to the question. Suggest in a paragraph ways in which we in South Africa can achieve sustainable livings and still ensure a stronger social, environmental, as well as economic growth. And I've asked you to remember the three R's. Remember reuse, recycle, and reduce. Let's write our paragraph. Simply put, in order to ensure sustainable use of our economy, we must ensure that our recycled, let's sort that out there, water is recycled. Remember, water is a precious resource, and we're living largely in a dry country in South Africa where we depend on our dams and dam construction to provide a lot of these marginal areas in South Africa where there is no water to pipe these water systems to there. Water is a precious resource, and therefore, if we control our water usage, we can ensure that we can use recycled water in many of our daily life activities. Let's look at reduce. What can we reduce? We can reduce our dependence on resources by limiting consumption. What types of consumptions? Our dependence on fuel. Presently, there is a large movement towards hybrid systems in cars. Our dependence on fossil fuels, and especially petroleum, is largely destroying our atmosphere, and therefore we must reduce and limit our consumption of these types of resources. Let's look at the next aspect. What can we reuse? Essentially, all resources that are renewable. Simply put, when we extract aspects like trees from the environment, we must ensure that whilst there's deforestation occurring, there is afforestation by planting more trees. If we do not care for the environment, then our economy is going to suffer at a later stage. Also, people who are dependent on economic growth will also suffer. This question incorporates the reuse, the recycle, as well as the third aspect, the reduction or reduce of all these resources. If we can live our lifestyles and limit our consumption rates, then our sustainability measures are in place to ensure future generations have these resources. These resources are available to them. Let's look at the next aspect of our study. The next section that we're dealing with is soils and soil erosion, which is one type of resources which is being diminished in our country. But before we go into an in-depth discussion about soil and soil erosion, I think you deserve a break. So when you come back, remember, we will be discussing the one resource in South Africa of the many resources that is being depleted as well as exploited in our country. See you in a bit. Welcome back, geographers. And grade 11 geography, we are now looking at resources that are being exploited in South Africa. And part of the content that you will need to understand is how is soil and soil erosion affecting the economic growth of our country. Let's go look at the aspects and key concepts that you need to understand in this section. The key concepts are as follows. How are soils formed? We look closely at soil as a resource, causes of soil erosion, in specific, we look at the human impact of soil erosion, the animal impact of soil erosion, as well as the physical and past and present impacts and causes of soil erosion. We look at evidence of soil erosion in South Africa. Very important is to look at how soil erosion affects the environment and people. And lastly, we will look at management strategies that the government is putting in place in order to prevent as well as control soil erosion. Let's take a closer look at how soils are formed. How soils are formed. Soil is a thin layer of loose organic, very important, organic material, weathered material found on the Earth's crust. Remember, you have studied in grade 10 geography about the layers of the Earth. So when we refer to soil, we are referring to that uppermost layer of the crust, that which is exposed on the surface of the Earth. Soils take a long time to form. Hence, we can classify soil as a non-renewable resource. Soil is a non-renewable resource. Once an area loses its soil, that soil is lost forever. Hence, soil, which we take for granted, is a non-renewable resource, and it has value because it impacts on all our primary activities which improve our economic growth in this country. Let's look at this particular picture. This picture suggests to us a high level of soil erosion. Note the dry areas in this diagram, which suggests that soil erosion is occurring. I want you to concentrate on the following. In continuation of how soils are formed, remember, there are factors that influence the rate at which soil erosion occurs. And we're going to classify them as following. Number one, relief. Number two, climate. 3, biological activity. And lastly, time. Let's look closely at relief. When we refer to relief, remember, we are referring to types of slopes. You should remember the following, that there are two types of slopes. One is a steep slope, and one is a gentle, and the other is a gentle slope. Where there are steep slopes, soil erosion is increased. Where there are gentle slopes, soil erosion does not occur as fast a rate. So in terms of how soils are formed, remember, soils are more common on gentle slopes than on steep slopes. The next factor, climate. What you should remember here is the following, that climatic conditions influence the type of soil that occurs in different parts of our country. We would expect that due to the high rainfall nature on the eastern half of the country, there would be more porous soils. As well as in the western half of the country, which is a much drier part of the country, there is less porous soils and therefore much drier soils and therefore a higher rate of erosion. However, when we're talking about climate, you should remember the following. Rainfall as well as temperature influence the rate of erosion. The higher the temperature, the higher the rate of biological activity. The lower the temperature, the lower the rate of biological activity, as well as rainfall. Higher rainfalls accelerate soil erosion and create more soil. Lower rainfalls also reduce the amount of moisture in the soil, which then results in a much drier soil, which increases the rate of erosion. So you have a situation where the rate of soil erosion is occurring at a much higher rate on the western half of the country rather than the eastern half of the country. The next type of soil erosion is biological activity. Remember, in drier areas, there is less biological activity, like in an example of decomposition. Decomposition bacteria accelerates the rate of soil erosion. But in the absence of decomposition bacteria, you have a much drier soil, which then becomes susceptible to soil erosion. So all our soils in this country are exposed to different types of temperatures, different types of slopes, as well as different types of biological activity. And this either increases or decreases the rate of soil erosion. When we're looking at time, remember, it takes a long time for soil to form. And the type of soil that we want is that which has nutrients. Unfortunately, in this country, the nutrients in the soil are located in specific areas, which then accelerates the growth of vegetation. Large parts of our country perform agricultural farming in the form of stock farming, especially in the drier areas. However, in the wetter areas, you will find that crop farming is more predominant. Let's look at the next aspect. Soils as a resource. Remember the following. Soils are important to agricultural and food production. Without soil, without the nutrients in those soil, we cannot improve and increase our agricultural production, as well as, simply put, the crop and stock production. And this is an important aspect of any economic growth. People generally live close to areas where there is fertile soil. Most people want to live where there is fertile soil for the lush growth as well as vegetation. Most ancient civilizations at the beginning of time searched for fertile lands in order to start their settlements. In South Africa, you should remember the following. Only 12 to 13% of the soil is suitable for crop farming. What does this mean in our country? Of the entire 100% of land that covers South Africa, only between 12 and 13% is available for crop farming, or mostly any form of agricultural activity. Why? Large parts of our country remain dry, and therefore there is an occurrence of building more dams and transporting water to these dry areas. How has this impacted on our country? We now see that there is a large concentration of people in core areas in our country. This is largely due to the fact that most of our land is not fertile. But as time goes on, we are trying to improve the conditions of these landscapes by transporting water to these areas that are dry. Hence, you should be remembering here your water transfer schemes, which you will study in grade 10. You've studied the aspects of water transfer schemes, and what you should understand is we take the water from the wet areas to the dry areas of the country. And now you will understand better why, in order to improve the agricultural activities of those areas. And when we improve agricultural activity, we ensure that there's employment as well as economic growth. The next aspect, the combination of hard parent rock and low rainfall has limited the development of deeper, more fertile soils. Simply put, and you'll remember from our lessons in geomorphology, large parts of South Africa have hardened rock, hardened igneous rock, which makes the performance of agricultural activities that much more difficult. In order to ensure, we've got to now look for areas that have fertile soils. Unfortunately, in our country, we don't have areas that are very fertile in soil. And this necessitates the transporting of water to these areas in order to ensure that there is agricultural activity occurring. Let's look at a typical type of question that you can experience in this section. Question 4. The population of South Africa reached over 54 million people in 2012. Remember, in 2012, we conducted a national census, and the amount of people living in our country is projected at 54 million people. Yet, according to scientific research, the farmlands in South Africa can only provide for less than 35 million. As we've discussed, there's only 12 to 13% of the land being used to perform agricultural activities, which means that as the population grows, the amount of agricultural activities needs to be increasing. Is it increasing? No. Does this mean more than 15 million people are starving? Explain your answer. If we look at the system logically, we have now discovered that most of our country is a dry country. Water transfer schemes are needed to transport this water, but currently we have more than 54 million people, inhabitants in this country. How do we support their growing needs for food and consumption? What are the different ways in which we can provide food to people besides growing agricultural products like crop farming, from crop farming as well as stock farming? Let's look at this closely. The one way in which we can alleviate the problem of overpopulation as well as under-resourced in terms of agricultural activities is food that is processed. Most of our chain stores in this country are now developing processed foods. This enables us to meet the demands of a growing population. Imports from agriculture. As the demand for more and more agricultural products increases, we are now forced to import various different forms of foods from various different countries. Often we get them at a cheaper rate. And if you've been reading the newspapers recently, the country is presently at a situation where we are importing more products, exporting more products into this country in order to ensure that our population needs are met. These are some of the ways in which we are now trying to satisfy the growing population. We will now look at causes of soil erosion, specifically human, animal, physical, past and present. Before we move any further, I want you to understand the following concept. What is soil erosion? And key aspects and words that you need to know in order to define the term soil erosion. It is the removal of fertile topsoil by water or wind and is a form of soil degradation, another word for depletion, that occurs naturally on all landscapes. Soil erosion is a natural process, and as we've discussed, remember the four concepts of relief, climate, biological activity, as well as time. These factors influence the rate at which soil erosion occurs. Another possible definition is the process of soil erosion is slow, but can be accelerated by various factors. We will look now closely at these factors. Human causes. The first human cause of soil erosion is termed monoculture. What is monoculture? Mono meaning one, culture meaning crops. Over a period of time, an agricultural product in the form of farmers producing, for example, maize, for example, any form of agricultural product from crop farming, results in a monoculture. Monoculture is where one type of crop is planted on the same piece of land year in, year out. When this activity occurs, we must remember the nutrients of the soil are constantly being extracted. And when these nutrients are being extracted, the soil loses its binding. The soil loses its nutrients and eventually starts eroding. The land becomes unable to ensure that there is agricultural activity occurring. So monoculture is caused by humans. Those farmers that year in, year out plant the same types of crops on the land. The next type is plowing on marginal land. Specifically here, we're looking at commercial type farmers, or what we're going to now term large-scale farmers. Your large-scale farmers have extensive farming land. And what the common occurrence is that accelerates soil erosion is that over a marginal piece of land, marginal meaning that soil which does not bind well, is plowed on. And this accelerates the rate of soil erosion. So remember, when we're talking about plowing on marginal land, we are talking that that soil which is susceptible to soil erosion but is being constantly used in order to ensure there is agricultural activity. This destroys the level of nutrients in the soil and therefore reduces the amount of agricultural activity and increases the rate of soil erosion. The lack of crop rotation. Crop rotation is a solution to some of the monocultural factors. However, most large-scale farmers, those farmers that are involved with heavy machinery, do not rotate their crops. Simply put, a farmer should be ensuring that he plants different types of crops in the land in order for the nutrients in the soil to restore themselves. However, year in, year out, he practices monoculture. Monoculture and the lack of crop rotation is closely linked. Planting crops against the gradient of the slopes. Remember, as we've discussed earlier, steep slopes accelerate soil erosion. Gentle slopes, there is a lower rate of soil erosion. However, some farmers do conduct agricultural activities on these steep slopes and hence accelerate the rate of soil erosion. Overgrazing. This aspect specifically looks at those stock farmers that expose their animals to the same piece of land. Just like monoculture, we have a situation in stock farming which we refer to as overgrazing, where the same land is used by the same animals year in, year out, and this accelerates the rate of soil erosion and reduces the amount of growth on the land. The use of chemicals, example, pesticides. One of the ways in which farmers are trying to improve their yields is by using pesticides and insecticides. However, these harmful chemicals that are contained in these insecticides and pesticides destroy the nutrients in the soil. Whilst trying to ensure one nutrient is replaced, others are removed. These chemicals prove harmful to most of the soil and accelerates the rate of soil erosion. And the last one that we will look at in terms of humans is deforestation, the large-scale removal of trees and plants over vast pieces of land. The moment trees or plants are removed from the soil, it loosens the soil and removes the binding potential of that soil. Deforestation accelerates the rate of soil erosion because it makes the soil much looser and therefore susceptible to a higher rate of erosion. Let's go back to the human factors that influence the rate of soil erosion. We've looked at 1, monoculture. Remember, monoculture is planting on the same piece of land the same type of crop year in, year out. Plowing on marginal land. Those large-scale farmers that practice year in, year out on marginal areas of land that are susceptible to soil erosion. The lack of crop rotation. There is no crop rotation and therefore the same nutrients are extracted from the land. Remember these two concepts of monoculture and lack of crop rotation. Planting crops against the gradients of the slopes. Most agricultural activities that occur on steep slopes accelerate the rate of soil erosion. We must be encouraging our farmers to farm on gentle slopes as there is a greater extent to which to farm and a lesser extent to which soil erosion can occur. Overgrazing, simply put, using the same piece of land for stock farming results in a reduction in nutrients of the soil. Use of chemicals, example pesticides. Whilst we replace some types of nutrients into the soil through the use of insecticides or pesticides, we actually are destroying the soil by removing other nutrients. These chemicals have a harmful effect on most of the soil and accelerates soil erosion. And the last one that impacts on humans is deforestation, the large-scale removal of trees and plants on the surface of the earth. Remember, once these trees are uprooted, they loosen the soil and make it susceptible to soil erosion. These are some of the aspects that we would look at in terms of the human impact and human causes of soil erosion. Let's move on to the next aspect. The next aspect we will discuss is causes of soil erosion again, and our focus is animal causes. And in this case, we've got two that we've been able to identify. Mass migrations, example, the wildebeest. Simply put, the mass migrations of animals across a vast expanse of land, especially the wildebeest, which on a yearly basis migrates from Tanzania to Kenya, and this causes large-scale soil erosion. The imbalance and overpopulation of one type of species. Remember something, biological inactivity and activity also can result in soil erosion. What we're looking at here is the same type of species living on the same type of land, year in, year out, results in a higher rate of soil erosion in these particular biological areas. What we have now is a photograph which shows us the wildebeest migration. If you look at these particular animals, as they migrate to Kenya from Tanzania, you will note the following. If you observe closely, you will note that there is large-scale soil erosion. Note the removal of vegetation in specific areas where these wildebeest migrate. This increases the rate of soil erosion, and it's a natural phenomenon. However, there are no clear-cut solutions for this problem, but it is one of the causes that accelerates soil erosion in terms of animals. So the two aspects we must remember here is mass migrations as well as overpopulation by one type of species. Let's look at the next aspect in terms of physical aspects and physical causes of soil erosion. The two we are able to identify in terms of a physical breakdown of soil is the following: erosion by water and erosion by wind. Two natural components of the atmosphere that also accelerate the rate of soil erosion. The last one is past and present in terms of causes of soil erosion, the influence of past on soil. As we've discussed earlier, only 13% of the land was used in terms of agricultural activity. But in South Africa, our history has dictated the rate of soil erosion. Acts during the apartheid era, like the 1913 Land Act, the creation of homelands in marginal areas in the 1950s, has resulted in people living in areas that is susceptible to soil erosion. These areas were created in order to ensure that access to fertile soil was reduced, which reduced the amount of activities in terms of agricultural activities that was enabled. So therefore, the past and present has largely influenced the way our agricultural activities are being performed today. If we look at South Africa in terms of soil erosion, we should note the following. Number one, there is a large concentration of people in the Gauteng area, as well as the Durban Pinetown region, the Port Elizabeth region, as well as the Western Cape. These areas specifically have fertile soil. Whilst we look at the rest of the country, you will see the following. Large areas are uninhabited. The reason for this is the following. The influencing South Atlantic High brings cold, dry air to this region, whilst the influencing South Indian High brings warm, moist air to this region. Remember, the Western Cape is largely influenced by its rainfall through the mid-latitude cyclone. During the apartheid years, people were concentrated in specific areas that were not as fertile. The soil here was susceptible to soil erosion, and therefore the accelerated rate at which it occurred destroyed these areas. Now we are forced to ensure that there is water transfer schemes to bring water to these areas in order to make the soil more productive. What we should also consider is the following. These core areas have a high demand due to the high population rates, and therefore water transfer schemes are also designed to supplement the current existence of water in these areas. This is to ensure that there is industrial activities as well as primary products that are produced from primary activities are sustained. What we should ensure is that we now start moving water through water transfer schemes into areas that have been marginalized in order to promote and produce more through these transfer schemes. Let's look now closely at the effects of soil erosion on people. Closely put, the reduction in the availability of farmland. The more soil erosion occurs, the less land is available to ensure farmlands. The drop in food production. As soil erosion rates increases in our country, our ability to produce food decreases. The rise in food prices. When the production of food decreases, there is a natural increase in the price of food, and this impacts largely on the economy. The increasing in unemployment, especially due to these factors, you will see how one leads to the other. With the increases in food prices, people are no more unemployed and labor costs increase. Increase in poverty. As the prices of food increases and unemployment increases, you have a situation where poverty starts increasing, especially in marginal areas of our country. People migrate to urban areas, and this results in a rural depopulation. So those are the aspects of the effects of people. We will now look at the effects on the environment of soil erosion. In terms of the effects on the environment, let's look closely at the following factors. The loss of vegetation, the increase in runoff, the silting of dams, and desertification. The loss of vegetation is simply that aspect which ensures that when soil erosion occurs, there is a reduction in vegetation of that particular landscape. Increasing runoff means simply water starts not infiltrating the surface but running off the surface. This reduces porosity as well as the nutrients in the soil as no water infiltrates. The increase in runoff. The silting of dams. As more and more soil is eroded, this soil finds its way to dams, which results in a reduction of water supply to most areas. And lastly, desertification. Remember, with deforestation comes desertification. And as we've now discussed, remember, with removal of trees and plants, you have a loosening of soil and a reduction of soil nutrients. This accelerates soil erosion and leaves the ground and landscape bare. This term used to describe this landscape is called desertification. Some of the strategies that can be used for the management of soil erosion. Management strategies to prevent and control soil erosion. What we should remember is the following. This is largely a political and economic factor. Land distribution and land reform. Due to large-scale acts that have influenced the way South Africa's population lives, we must now ensure that there is large-scale land distribution or restitution as well as land reform. We must ensure that the fertile areas are now being farmed adequately to ensure economic growth. Education and training. The government has instituted the Development Bank, which ensures that new small-scale farmers, which are farmers which used to be subsistence or farm on a small scale to ensure profits, are now educated as well as trained in order to develop themselves into the economy. More scientific approaches to farming. As more and more large-scale farmers develop, there are new ways and technology is enhancing the level of production. We must expose our farmers to these technological aspects that improve the crop yield of crop farming as well as stock farming. Technical changes. Those farmers that are forced to farm on steep slopes must ensure that they use contour plowing. A contour plow is basically a step-like construction on a steep slope. When a slope is steep, we must ensure that this slope is managed in such a way that crops are grown in a specific way so that the slope is cut into, and we refer to this as terraced farming. Strip farming methods, especially where there is a monoculture, we must ensure that we break up the different types of crops by strip farming. Strip farming simply means planting of different types of crops in between the main crops. avoiding overgrazing and overcropping. These are solutions to overgrazing and overcropping. Farmers must simply ensure that they rotate crops as well as their stock so that soil is allowed to restore its nutrients. Biological diversity. Too many times, most farmers use the same types of animals on the same type of land. What we have to ensure is that different types of animals are used for stock farming in order to ensure that not the same nutrients are extracted from this type of farmland. Conserving wetlands, very important. Wetlands in our country, as for example, the St. Lucia wetlands, which is a World Heritage Site in South Africa, is a naturally protected area. These type of wetlands provide for biological diversity as well as ecosystems that need to be protected. And these areas are susceptible to soil erosion. What the government tries to do is ensure they protect these areas in order to reduce the impact of soil erosion. We will now look at a typical type of question that you will receive in the exam for this type of section. What political and economic changes could help to control and reduce soil erosion? Explain how these changes would impact on people and the environment. Note the following. We are looking specifically at political as well as economic changes. Although we've discussed it, let's look at some other ideas that the government could employ. Legislation. And this is simply putting laws in place for marginal areas to reduce soil erosion. In terms of this, the government is required to ensure that there are laws for people who overuse their land and overcrop as well as overgraze, and this would ensure that no land is over-marginalized. In terms of legislation, the next aspect will be fines. What can the government do in terms of ensuring there is a political as well as economic intervention in terms of reducing soil erosion? Besides legislation, the government can also impose fines. On farmers who do not observe laws regarding erosion rates. What else can we do to ensure that the rates of erosion of soil decreases so that we have more sustainable use of soil? Good, we've looked at government. Now let's look at the economy. We should reduce development on steep slopes to reduce the rate of soil erosion. So let's remember, we always concentrate when any sustainability question comes out, the following, the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, as well as recycle. When you take these 3 aspects into account, it should be able to assist you to answer any paragraph type questions. Guys, we have been able to ensure that your understanding of resources as well as sustainability is better enhanced today. What you should remember is one of the aspects of sustainability and resources that we've discussed is soil erosion. Soil erosion is occurring at a rapid rate in our country, and this is reducing our ability to ensure that we have better farming in terms of stock and crop farming. Further to this, we must ensure that we live our lives sustainably. by reducing, recycling, as well as reviewing what we've done. We are going to ensure that future generations are protected and our economy constantly develops. I hope you've enjoyed today's session on resources and sustainability. And good luck for your exams, guys. See you soon.